Okay, for this video, I thought we could do controls on screen so that the players know what buttons they're supposed to press, right? I mean, the controls for this game is kind of convoluted, so it would be nice to have a guide. But first, I have discovered a bug. If you run the game and you don't press anything, you just start the game, the ball moves straight. And I mean, if you line things up this way, then we could be here all day, because we don't have any way of changing the direction that the ball is going. That's also something that I want to add soon. So why is this happening? Well, in input start, no, not in input start, in update start, we set the direction of the ball to last move, right? So that, you know, the ball would go in the direction that the paddle last moved, thus the name. Problem is, at the top of the file, when we initiate the paddles, we give them a last move of 0. And that only changes once we move a paddle. And updates run every frame. So as soon as the game starts up, it immediately updates the direction to 0. And then it stays 0 until we move the paddle. Now the reason we hadn't noticed it until now is because the first thing you normally do when a game starts up is move the paddle. That's because we know what we're doing. So at the moment we're showing that the ball is going to be going up vertically, which is -1. So it makes most sense to preset this value to -1. This is only something we have to worry about at the beginning of the game. As soon as the paddle moves, this problem solves itself. But now if we run the game and just start the match, the ball goes in the direction that it's indicated, and all is well with the world. So, little bug fix. Now, in the original version of this video, because this is not the first time I'm recording it, I went to the sprite editor, I went to the sprites, there's our little arrow that we drew earlier. I picked an arbitrary spot and started drawing. And I sat here for probably an hour, just faffing about pixel arting, because I'm terrible at art. And it was boring, and even if I fast forwarded through that section, it took forever. So I have exported the sprites that I designed. They're not great, but they're serviceable. And I'll upload the file to GitHub, link in the description. Hey, I got to say that. But now how do you get that file into TIC? Because we have loaded a file that we copied into the game's folder, into the cartridge folder. That was in part 3, I think. But it gets a little bit more interesting if you want to import parts of a cart into your existing cart. So, by the way, help is a really useful command. And then you type the name of the command that you want help with. And the command we're looking at is import. So, you can import the code from another cartridge, the sprites from another cartridge, or a PNG file, the map data, so the map layout, and other stuff, sound effects, music, all that stuff. You can import into an existing cart. So we already have, actually, save Pong 11. We already have our cartridge loaded, right? There's all our code with our little fix we just made. So if you download the PNG that's on my GitHub, and you copy it into the folder where your cartridges are stored in TIC-80. Let me quickly switch to that. Right, there's the file. It's a PNG, right? But now how do you get that into the thing? So, import. What are we importing? Sprites. And then the file name. See, it says there in brackets, file. There, file. So, it's called sprites.png. Now the nice thing about TIC-80 is if you hit tab, it auto-completes file names. Unless there's more than one of the same file, in which case it stops a little short. So this will presumably import that PNG as our sprite sheet. Sprites.png imported with a little smiley face. So if I now go to my sprite editor, there they are. D-pad up and down with the closest approximation I could get to a launch picture that implies that the ball is going to launch. There's one for the face buttons, that's for player 2. And then don't worry about these. That we'll get to this in a minute. So now we need to display these. So we display UI stuff in draw start. So in draw start, there we go, right at the bottom, controls. Now this is a sprite. We need the sprite ID. This is, these are 4 sprites wide, 4 sprites down, because that's the only way that I could draw it in a way that even was recognizable as a controller. So that's a single sprite, that's a 2x2, that's a 4x4. So then your sprite ID works off the top left corner. That is the section we want to draw, so we're drawing 258. 258. A little bit in from the left, because this is our x coordinates, so 30. We want it below the text and to the left, so we are drawing the player 1, player 2 start thing at ready, and then player 1. Oh, okay, there we go. We're drawing at 94, so let's put this below that. 100. Our transparency color is 0. Scale is 1. There's no flip, no rotation, and then this is an important one. How many sprites wide and how many sprites down? So this is 1, 2, 3, 4 sprites wide and 1, 2, 3, 4 sprites down. So 4, 4. Save. Run. We have controls, and they do actually match. Well, they would match the buttons we're pressing. So, okay, then we need to duplicate this line and do the same for this side. So this is top left corner of this is 262. So that should be 262. Now we wanted 30 in from the right, 30 pixels in from the right, so it's spaced the same. So our width is 240 minus the 30 pixels in we wanted, minus the width of the sprites themselves, because we're drawing from the left edge. So a single sprite is 8 pixels wide, so 8, 16, 32. It'll be 32 pixels in from the right. Height remains the same, everything else remains the same. Save and run, and we have paddle 2 controls. Cool. And they do match the buttons that we set up, like up and down, and then the launch button wouldn't work now because paddle 1 has control. So next up, you're sitting at a computer or at a laptop coding this thing, and not everybody has a controller, so we should be able to play with the keyboard as well. Now TIC-80 does this thing where, let me quickly open the menu. So if you're not in developer mode and you press escape in a cartridge, this is the menu that pops up. I think we disabled that in one of the earliest episodes, one of the earliest videos. So in options, you'll see that there's setup gamepad. These are the buttons for gamepad 1. It's the up, down, left, right of gamepad 1 is mapped to the arrow keys. And then A, B, X, Y is mapped to, on a QWERTY keyboard, the 4 buttons on the far left. Now the problem is, if we were to use this as air quotes keyboard controls, it would essentially be flipped, because paddle 1 uses the arrows. Paddle 1 is on the left. On my keyboard, the arrows are on the right. So we can't use these as an emulated controller. We actually need to put in proper keyboard controls. So step 1 is to add in our paddle what buttons do what. Now I'll bring up the cheat sheet thing on the right here for the keyboard map, but it is tricky to understand. But there's a handy little thing. So this help command, I just used it to bring up the help import info, but you can also put in help buttons, which gives you, you've seen this before in my little cheat sheet, but that's what the 4 controllers and their button numbers are. And for the same thing, you can put in help keys, and you get this list of keyboard keys. So the ones we're interested in would be, for paddle 1 being on the left, is A and Z. So A is code 1, Z is code 26. So for paddle 1, let's put key up is equal to 1. Key down is equal to, what did I say, 26. 26. And then we can use the X button, the X key, to launch. So 24, which means key OK would be 24. All right. For player 2, we want key up to be the up arrow. I'll fix this in a second. Key down to be the down arrow. And key OK to be left. So we need up, down, and left. Up is 58, down is 59, left is 60. That's nice. 58, 59, 60. 58, comma, 59, comma, and 60, comma, just so that this array stays nicely organized. Save. How do we listen to keyboard inputs instead of button inputs? Well, first, we would need to know whether we are using the keyboard or the controller. So we put in a global called keyboard. If it's true, we're paying attention to keyboard and ignoring the controller. Where do we check what inputs? Well, there's two places we check inputs: input start and inputs game. Let's start with start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. This will be the fastest to debug because we don't even have to start the game to see whether this works. Input start. How do we check whether the OK key is being pressed? We might need to refactor this a little bit. We still need to know that we're looking at the active player's controls. So we keep this loop here. Break this. If the paddle we're looking at is the active player, then we need to check if this is tabbed in. So this will all be tabbed in. Now we're doing two checks. So if, let's keep this one the original. If it's not keyboard controls, so not keyboard means this will be true if the value keyboard is false. If not keyboard and the button being pressed is okay. Now we opened the bracket there, so we need to close the bracket here. The fact that there's already a bracket there makes it a little confusing because this function has a closed parenthesis. So we need two parentheses. So if our controls are not keyboard and we're pressing the OK button, then do the thing. Or, now we're running out of space. You can break a conditional into a separate line. That tab isn't necessary, but I find it easier to read. A new check, if we are looking at keyboard inputs, and new function, key, which is to read keyboard input, pad.key, OK. Then we do the thing. Okay. So this part stays the same, except that if keyboard is set to true, we ignore it because both of the conditions have to be true for this bracket to be true. Or, which means either this line or this line needs to be true. If we are looking at keyboard inputs and the key that's being pressed, not the button, is the OK key, then we start. So if I run this now, I broke it. So this if is okay. This if is for the function. This if is for which controller. Do the thing. Oh, well, they are tabbed in. Clear the screen so that I can see my error message properly. String title, line 254, end expected. We are missing an end because it's going through the entire file, and when it hits the bottom of the file, there should still be one more end. So if this happens or this happens, then do these things. End, do the thing. End for, oh, this is we need the end for because we broke that into its own thing. And also now our tabs work out nicely. End, 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 end. Hey, there we go. Okay. So I'm only checking the confirm button, but now if I press up and down on the controller, it should go up and down. If on the keyboard I press up and down, it's still moving paddle 1 because the emulated controls are reading the arrow keys on my keyboard as up and down on the controller. But if I now press left on the D-pad on the controller, it does nothing because we're listening to keyboard inputs. If I press, what was the button for player 1? X, it goes. Also, pressing X makes paddle 2 move because on the emulated control, it's reading X as, what's it, B on paddle 2. So we also need to fix inputs game. So for each paddle, if it's not keyboard and the up button is being pressed, or if it is keyboard and the key for pad dot key up is being pressed, then move the paddle up. By the same logic, did I check my brackets? Yes. Oh, that's it. Or if not keyboard and down arrow, or yes keyboard and keypad dot key down, then we do the thing. Okay, that'll take care of the ups and downs. And I think that's the only places that we use the up and down and confirm. That should be it. Run. So we're in keyboard control. Maybe we should just, for debug purposes, I'm just going to put it here. Print the status of keyboard in the top left corner in white. So up here, why is it not printing? Oh, because I do this before I print. So let me rip this out. Go to draw start, stick it in here. This is just for debug purposes, don't worry about this. There we go. Keyboard is true, which means we're looking at keyboard controls. So the D-pad moves the right paddle, A and Z move the left paddle. X is launch, and then if I just return this and then make myself lose, for the right player, the left arrow, the left direction is launch. Now these are wrong. So we also need to, actually let's leave that in for now. Draw start. We do have sprites for these. Here we go, draw controls. If keyboard, then draw these. Else, the only other state we have is controller. No, wait. These are the controller keys, so they go in the else. Here we need to draw, let's hijack the same code, but we need to draw, instead of this and this, we need to draw this one, 322 and 326. 322, 326. Save, run. We are in keyboard mode. These are the keyboard controls. They are in exactly the same spot and I have the same info on them. I made this point towards the other side of the field, but unfortunately it doesn't turn. You know, if you decide to move the paddle down, the icon doesn't change. You can do that if you want. I don't think it's necessary. Okay, we are showing the correct keyboard controls. Now, how do we switch these? I think we will build a menu for this eventually. So when the game starts up, it asks you what controls to use. We'll do that in the next video. But for now, so I used this earlier to run the menu, right? There's a way of adding menu items to this menu. It's called the menu callback. It starts with some metadata. At the top of the file, we add an entry called, I think it's called menu, and then we put in some text. Okay, now if I execute that menu, there's an entry called game menu. Inside that game menu, we now have two options called sum and text. They don't do anything yet, but they exist. How do we make them do something? Well, firstly, we can change this to say keyboard and controller. Keyboard and controller. So let's do that again. There's a typo in there. Menu, game menu, it now says keyboard and controller. Okay. There's a callback. Same as we have boot and TIC and all that. There is one, maybe we just stick it right at the bottom somewhere. Where's our helper? Here we go. Under our helper functions, we create a new function called menu. And this receives an ID of what was pressed. Now, when you select an option in the menu, if you select the first one, this returns 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, depending on which item you pick. So we know whether we picked keyboard. If it picked a 0, keyboard is 0, controller is 1. So, if ID is equal to 0, then we set keyboard to true. Else if, we have to put an else if, because I know it's the only other option, so just going else is fine because you can't pick something that's not on the menu. But maybe we will add other options to the menu later on, and then it'll be important that we don't break this. Else if ID is equal to 1, so we definitely pressed this, the second thing, then we know we're switching to controller things, so then we set keyboard is equal to false. End. This needs to be tapped in. Just get rid of this. Get rid of this. Let's put in some comments that are actually useful. Keyboard controls and okay. But now, okay, let's just test it first. So run the game. Keyboard is still set to true. Everything still works the way it's supposed to. I know it's a schlep to execute the menu every time, but I showed this in a previous thing. If you go into options and you turn dev mode off, it says the game menu is disabled in dev mode. If you turn dev mode off and then leave the menu, now you're playing the game, minding your own business. If you press escape, this comes up. You don't see the code. Now, the reason I turn off dev mode is because if you actually want to work on the game and you go close game, it goes back to the menu. Reset game resets the game. So it makes it very tricky to get to your code. So while we're working on the thing, it's better to leave dev mode off. But for now, let dev mode on. So game menu says keyboard or controller. If I now select controller, it switches the keyboard value to false and it shows the controls for the controller. Cool. So that even works. Okay. I should say my catchphrase. One more little thing is there is a way of getting to your code. Something to keep in mind that your TIC-80 code is never hidden from the player. It is always with a bunch of the right button presses, anyone can see your code. You can, if you buy TIC-80, if you get the Pro mode, or I think if you compile it from source code, you can export binaries. That'll just run the card, and if you quit, it quits, and then people can't see your code if you do want to make a commercial game with TIC-80, because that is possible. But we're doing this for fun. It's a hobby. Why bother with stuff like that? So, what I was going to say is, as soon as there's a space here, it creates a next menu item. So how do you make this 2 words? You put a tab, keyboard controls, and maybe shared tab controller. I know it looks the same. Actually, as a matter of fact, in all of this, these are all tabs, but they all look like spaces. So keyboard controls and shared controller. Let's run it. Press escape, go to game menu, and now we have the words keyboard controls and shared controller. Now, all the menu options are in capital letters. So just for consistency, we should probably write we should probably write this in capitals as well. So keyboard, tab, controls, and shared tab, controller. Save, run it. Still on keyboard controls, game menu. This is neatly in capitals. And selecting shared controller switches to controller buttons, and selecting keyboard controls switches to keyboard controls. Awesome. Last thing. Let's just remove that debug print. No. Where do I print the status of keyboard? Keyboard true. Where's our print line? There it is. It's just shift delete. Oh, control delete. Can I not delete the whole line? There we go. Just so that that's out of the way up there. We don't need it anymore. We know it works. Oh, and then turn dev mode back on so that we don't have to struggle with this menu every time. Awesome. We now have close game. Close game. We now have keyboard controls, which will also make it much easier to work on the game. And I considered doing this earlier, but the way that the tutorial is structured, it makes sense for it to come up at this juncture. Okay, in the next episode, we are going to add a screen, a menu, where the game starts up and it asks you what controllers you want. And then once you've selected it, it goes to the game. Because most players are not going to know to go find that game menu and won't know how to switch it. So main menu with the possibility to switch to pick what control scheme you want before the game starts. All right.